Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, helping you to find jargon-free information before choosing a professional to help solve your problems and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stuart Andrew Alexander.
Hi and welcome to another Let's Talk Divorce conversation. And during this segment of the show, ladies and gentlemen, I have attorney Kenneth Wincorn, who is the owner of the law offices of Kenneth G. Wincorn and Associates in Sunny Richardson, Texas. Now, Kenneth is going to be talking to you about a very interesting topic. Sounds quite rudimentary, but is really important. So his topic for today is planning for divorce. So if you're out there and you're tuning in, seeking jargon-free information before taking on any form of professional help, you may want to just stop what you're doing, down tools, find a quiet spot where you won't be disturbed, and listen in to what Kenneth has to share with you today. So with that said, he's a very busy man, so let's not keep him waiting a moment longer. Welcome to the show, Kenneth.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure.
You are so welcome. So, Kenneth, before we dig into the meat and potatoes, as we say here in the UK, let's just start with a legal disclaimer. Let's just get that out of the way so everybody knows what we're doing today. It goes without saying that anything you share with us today is not any form of legal or therapeutic advice or assistance. It's purely for the purpose of sharing information. Now, would you just take a brief moment, just explain that in your own words so everybody knows exactly what we're trying to achieve today?
Certainly. It is critical when an attorney is speaking to you that, and in a medium like we are now, that they not give specific advice because we don't know the facts. That's one. And it's also it's very risky to give general advice because it can be wrong in a different situation. Each person's situation is personal to them. The situation you have with your relationship is not the same as someone else's. So we don't give specific advice. We give general advice in this kind of an interview, and try to give you a framework to work from.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that with us today, Kenneth. So, first question I have for you is spend a few moments and just briefly describe your company, the types of people who you serve, and the various kinds of situations that they find themselves in when they come to you for your help.
Generally, we deal with a very, very broad cross-section of the population. We speak 7 languages in our office, and so we can work in many different communities. We also have experience with the cultural differences, and that makes a huge difference in a relationship. I've been doing this now for 51 years, so it's a short amount of time, and we find that divorce is a topic that is so important, so critical to everyone, that we have to be very, very careful about the type of advice we give and to try to work with every individual on an in-depth basis. I want to mention that we generally do not want to encourage divorce. It is part of the responsibility for the attorney to attempt to try to save as much as can be done of the relationship. And in some cases, divorce is not necessary, even though it appears that way at first. So everyone's situation is never the same. Situations with children, situations with emotions, situations with even sometimes danger. So we have to be very, very careful that we treat everyone with respect, but also to know that this is a very complicated area.
Okay, Ken. So in the 51 years that you've been working in this industry, I'm sure you've come across many misconceptions from the people who you work with on a daily basis. But in the interest of time, could you just share one of the most common misconceptions that you come across?
I think the most common misconception is that a divorce by itself will solve the problems that in the relationship. The divorce will not do that by itself. It requires a team really to solve those problems very often. Sometimes it requires counseling, but the divorce can be critical. It can be done very often. It's necessary because of danger. But it will not solve the fact that there is an issue that caused this relationship to break up. So it's very important to analyze that, and as well as just getting a divorce.
So if I'm picking up on that, and if I'm understanding what you just shared correctly, do people sometimes have a perception that a divorce is almost like, you go to McDonald's and order a Big Mac, I want one of those divorces, and then it's just over and done with? Am I on the right lines there?
That's correct. The idea is that it will solve all problems, and it doesn't. It creates its own set of problems. This is one of the reasons sometimes people don't get a divorce, sometimes when they should, because they're afraid of those problems that will come up. Children. What's going to be the effect on the children?
Right. Yeah. I've seen that with many of my friends, in my own circle of influence, people who are in relationships where they really should get a divorce, and others who have been divorced and then after the divorce get on even better with each other than when they were married. So, it's an odd thing for sure.
That's true, and I've actually had one time where there was a huge party afterwards. The two actually were extremely happy, and before they'd been miserable. So it's everyone is different.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about this topic of planning for divorce. Then, Ken, how do people actually benefit? I mean, it sounds logical, but how do people benefit from planning for divorce?
Well, the first question that has to be asked is, what am I going to do pre-divorce when we separate? Because that has to happen first. If you're going to get a divorce, you don't want to stay together. Or at least it's very rare. I've even seen that happen, but rare. So you start planning on that financially. What's going to be the effect? Can you afford to live separately? If it's the woman, if it's the man, what is going to happen to your business? All the plan as to what's going to happen with stock. What's going to happen with if it's a partnership with your partner in the relationships. What interest does your spouse have in that? In that business, your property, how are you going to divide it? And it's extremely beneficial to work these things out before. Part of divorce, the most important part probably is the planning. If you're going to avoid a huge expense and tremendous frustration, planning does work if you have any way to communicate with the other side. If you don't have to, then sometimes a marriage counselor can be a help. Your lawyer should be a help. We do counseling, but we don't do counseling to the extent that's necessary in most cases to resolve all the issues.
So if planning is so important, then, Ken, I guess full disclosure, exposing or sharing everything with your attorney must be paramount, right? That must be really important, to not hold back on any kind of information.
You really must. That's absolutely true. If you exaggerate, that's a problem. But if you tell something that is not true to your lawyer, and then on the basis of that, he goes forward trying to resolve the conflicts with the other side, with the attorney for the other side, you have done tremendous damage to your case. Your lawyer does not reveal any confidences that you tell him about. Anything that you tell him is privileged, just like a doctor. The lawyer is not allowed to give that information out unless you give permission. But it is so important that the information that you give is accurate.
So what could be some of the consequences if you did hold back on some very important information, or you shared information that was inaccurate? What are the kind of things that you've come across that could happen?
You can see businesses sometimes destroyed. You'll see sometimes that the spouse maybe may make allegations of fraud. If that becomes it affects not just the property interests, but it affects custody of children. It affects visitation. It affects everything in the attempt to try to settle the case. It makes it almost well, it's not impossible, but it makes it so difficult, and the result generally is not what you want.
All right. And I guess one of the reasons why people may hold back on information is based in fear, fear of what they perceive to be, what the result could be. So, if we're talking about fear and the topic of the planning for divorce, what are some of the most common fears that you see people have when it comes to planning their divorce? And how can they actually get past that fear then, Ken?
Probably the number one fear they have is that they're going to be taken advantage of, that they're going to lose everything if they have, or lose most of it. And that's really communicating with your lawyer, and sometimes, in major cases, financial experts, to decide how to resolve those issues. But they need to be discussed. They can't be ignored. Other fears, losing children. Again, any fear that you have needs to be discussed with your lawyer and try to get an understanding of how to approach that. Sometimes it takes a while to get to the bottom of things and to resolve them. Trying to do something quickly often is a mistake. Sometimes you need to have analysis. You might need to have outside experts to help to give advice or to put things into perspective.
So you just mentioned that trying to do something quickly is a mistake, and that's kind of a good segue into my next question, Ken. What's some of the most common, or let's say unknown pitfalls or mistakes that you see people should avoid, and how can they avoid that as they're going through the process of divorce?
One of them is, very big one, is don't try to get even with your spouse. That causes, of course, huge problems. Don't use the system to try to get even. I've certainly seen it. I have seen situations where people have used children against the other party and seen tremendous damage done. So this kind of issue, when it comes up, needs to be this kind of thing needs to be avoided like the plague. It's terrible. Other issues that you run into, of course, they're the financial issues. How do you, while the divorce is ongoing, how do you support the other side? What if it's necessary? What is required? What's needed? What you can do? What can be done to save property? Make sure that things are paid, that the bills are paid. You can wind up having mortgage issues if the mortgage isn't paid because you don't know what the other party's doing. So these needs to be addressed at the beginning if they really are a danger.
So can you, as you alluded to before, you've been around 51 years in this industry. So I'm sure if anybody does hire your services, they would benefit from all of that experience that you bring to the table. However, could you share, let's say, 2 to 3 perceived obstacles in the, let's say, your prospective client's mind that may prevent somebody from seeking the help of a professional like yourself?
Cost would probably be the number one issue. They're afraid that it's going to be expensive, and it may or it may not be. The client has, to a large extent, control of that. The more difficult that the client makes negotiating, and the less information that the client gives, the more time it will take to resolve the issues. And if the case has to go to court and go to trial, it does become expensive. That's not necessary. Mediation can solve a lot of problems, but there has to be cooperation. If we don't have the cooperation, then we're going to have that financial issue. The next issue, emotional issues. In most divorces, in most breakups, there are a series of emotions that people go through, and there's a stage where they're apologetic. They feel it's their fault. Then, at some point in the process, they will start blaming the other side, and that's where this issue of getting even starts to come in. It needs to be avoided if it possibly can be, because then rationality goes out the window, and a settlement that should be simple becomes very, very difficult. If assets are being hidden, or it's perceived that they're being hidden, then we wind up with court proceedings that are frustrating and expensive. Definitely do not want to do that.
Mm. Have you ever had a case where somebody actually got away with hiding assets? I've never heard that myself.
I have had a case where I actually had to be involved with getting the attorney on the other side disbarred because of that. The situation was one that had to do with the Olympics. I had a client with a son who was one of the top three skaters in the United States. This was many years ago. And it required quite a bit of money to go to travel for the finals for the Olympics. The father told the court that he had absolutely no money. The attorney presented evidence that there was no money at all to go forward. The young man did not get to the competition. He lost his career. He lost everything. And then within a year later, I discovered that the attorney had taken $400,000 from his account and had put it into his own account. So the attorney was actually involved in a fraud and did unbelievable damage to this young man. So the answer is yes, I have seen it. That's the only time I've seen that. I have seen some very, very unfortunate situations with people who are trying to get even with the other and using the child. And this destroys the child. That is a horrible thing to do, but it has to be avoided if it possibly can. There's also issues with danger, where one party gets so upset they start to threaten the other side, and they start to follow them. And then there are a whole series of protections that we have available, but it becomes very expensive going back and forth to court. And even with the court protections, it's not always safe. So I have certainly seen that.
So as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is attorney Kenneth Wincorn, who has been addressing the topic of planning for divorce. Now then, Kenneth, you've shared some great insight so far. So let's just flip the script, as I say, and talk a little bit about you. You've already mentioned that you've been around for 51 years in this industry, but please tell us a little bit about your backstory. What led or even inspired you to become and do what you do today? Please go ahead.
I was inspired originally by being involved very much in the civil rights movement in the United States and involved with the United Nations. When I was a kid, when I was very young, family was very involved with trying to do things to protect people's rights, civil rights. And I felt that was so critically important. And all through my life, I've been in the aviation business. I've been in many businesses, but I always found that it was critical to benefit people, to always keep that in mind. And I found that the law practice was the one area of all the things that I've done where I could do the most good, where my company could really help people. It's a wonderful feeling that you have a purpose in your life. And I think that's always been the driving force for me.
Mm. So imagine it's any day of the week, let's say Monday morning, and I don't know if you use an alarm clock anymore, but at some stage in the morning, you wake up and you have a full day's work ahead of you helping your clients. How does Kenneth Wincorn feel on a day like that?
In the morning, on Monday morning, I'm normally very excited. I've spent the night dreaming about what it was going to be, what the day was going to, what would be entailed in the next day, what opportunities would be there, and what things can I do with the various issues that I know are coming up. Now, on Monday, we normally have quite a few new clients, so I'm going to confront new issues. Sometimes issues that I haven't seen before, but after all these years, that's rare to find something that I haven't dealt with, at least to a great extent. But I've never dealt with everything, and every person is exciting because they're different, and there's going to be an opportunity to help them.
You call yourself an attorney, but for me, Kenneth, personally, I would say you're a transformationalist, because people come to you and they are in situation A, and you use your skill, your experience, your knowledge to get them to point B where they ideally would like to be. So for me, you create a transformation. So when you're able to create that transformation, what does that give you, Ken? What do you get out of that?
tremendous feeling of satisfaction, and the knowledge that that person, even from a business standpoint, is wonderful because I know they're going to come back, or they're going to be sending themselves. I know I have the same cards that I've used now for 50 years, the same silver card with the same phone number. And I have people come in, so especially the fairly young people come in and say, my grandfather had this in his wallet, and he said, you need to use this attorney. My grandfather isn't around anymore, but I still have the card. Well, I have this feeling I did something wonderful for them. There's no greater feeling in the world than knowing that you've helped someone and that they appreciate it.
Right. And that's actually a good segue. And I didn't get the chance to speak with you before you came on the show about the actual reason for me doing this series called Let's Talk Divorce. And we've been doing this since 2015 now. And I think I've interviewed over 300 divorce professionals like yourself. But the main reason behind it is I myself am a child of divorce. My parents went through a very volatile, violent and bloody divorce, and that all played out in front of me. And I was only 7, 8 years old when that was happening. So obviously I didn't have the nous to understand and to be able to decipher what was really going on, and carried the weight of my parents' separation on my tiny little shoulders throughout my young life, throughout my teenage years and into my young adulthood. And it had, it had a massive impact, negative impact on the choices I made in life. And, I could write a book about it, and one day I think I actually will, but it took me until I'm about 40 years old, and I'm 60 years old now, to figure out that a lot of the things that happened and a lot of the choices I made were a result of what happened in my childhood. So that inspired me to start this show, to bring on experts like yourself, to share your insights in the hope that any parents out there, any people who have children and they find themselves in that unfortunate situation where maybe they're at loggerheads, there's a lot of confrontation and children are caught in the middle, that when they hear the insights on this show, that they may hopefully just take a more amicable approach, because at the end of the day, the children are the ones that get damaged. And I always say, no matter how much you hate your partner, love your children even more. So with all your years of experience, if there is anybody listening in right now and they find themselves in that awful situation, and there are children involved, but, they're at loggerheads with their partners, and maybe rightly so, maybe, they've been something awful has been done to them, but the children are caught in the middle. What would you say to that person or those persons listening in right now, Ken?
First thing I would suggest is a marriage counselor. Not that you can solve the problems, they can solve the problems that are the cause for the divorce, but because they can get to some of the factors and they can deal with the children. Sometimes a counselor who is an expert on child psychology is a huge help, because it's very difficult to deal with yourself. Emotions sometimes get completely out of control. I've certainly seen it and I understand it. But you're absolutely correct. The children come first. If you can put the children first, if you possibly can, sit back and talk about them only in your mind, hopefully you can create some balance. If you don't do that, the damage that can be done to the children, just as you were saying, is incalculable. And with the effect that it will have on the rest of their lives is something that, even though you can't foretell what it will be, it's probably not going to be good, and it's going to be very difficult for them to have a good relationship in the future. If all they see is discord and conflict, they don't know what a good marriage can be, and they don't know what love is. So show that love to your children, yourself, and don't use them against the other partner. That's to me, that would be number one. If this talk has any impact at all, what I'm speaking about today, I hope that it's in that area to get people to think. And if it affects one person, then this has been very successful.
That's the whole reason why we do what we do. If it affects one person, then it's all worth it for me too, Ken. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
So, Ken, if somebody is in the market looking for a professional, if they want to evaluate the professional in your field before hiring them, what would you say should be some of the things they should look out for in that professional?
First is a good reputation. And how do you find that? That is a huge issue. Ask other attorneys who are not competing, but who are doing something else, and see if you know an attorney who has been successful, who you've had good results with referring people to. I mean, that's one way to find an attorney. Always interview several. Do not settle on one, unless you know them first and you know that you trust them. Try to see who you feel comfortable with, because you're going to be dealing with very emotional issues with someone that you must trust. So interview 2 or 3, see if you get along with those, and if you don't, interview more. Once you finally find the correct person, be honest with them, be open. They need that in order to be able to help you. If they are experienced, they'll have a very good idea what to do. And a few years of experience under their belt is probably a good idea.
Anything else?
Look at the totality of what you need. If it is a divorce that involves property and involves money, you want someone who has some business experience too. It's more than just family law, because there may be structures that have to be changed. There may be relationships with partners that need to have discussions, and they need to have that expertise either themselves or within their law firm. It's amazing how one thing leads to another. If it's an issue that involves immigration, and this is a big area for us, that has a huge impact, if they're not a citizen, on what will happen with the future, what happens with the children, and how do you deal with the immigration system. There are a myriad of issues that can come up in many areas. If there are things, well, I've had aircraft and boats sometimes that become issues, and they may be movable, and they may have to go to other countries. And is the attorney familiar with international law? Are they familiar with the various issues that are critical in that particular ethnic group? So I think there are, you depending upon your situation, you need to choose that person, and just because you like them doesn't mean that they have the expertise. And that is important. Also look at your finances and be sure that what you commit to, you can do.
Some very good insights there, Ken. Thank you so much. You know, something, the time is just flying so fast. We have come to the end of the show, but before you do go then, Ken, how can the listener who may want to know more about planning for divorce, or, you know, maybe they have a business and they're facing bankruptcy, or maybe they have real estate issues, immigration issues, how can they find out more about you? You know, how can they connect with you? 1, and 2, which is really important, what actually happens when they do reach out to your company? Because people want to know, they want to know if there's a risk factor involved in reaching out to you, because you can just easily say, yes, this is our phone number, this is our email address, this is our website, but people don't know what's behind that. They want to know, are you going to drag them to the back of your office and hit them over the head with a Fred Flintstone club, so please share. How do they get hold of you, and what's your process? Go ahead.
Well, they certainly can go to the website, which is wincorn.com, and that gives some perspective. And they can directly email me at kwincorn@wincorn.com, or they can call. There is no charge for a consultation. The other thing that we can do that's fairly new are conferences, video conferences. If you have the capability, if you have a camera on your computer, we can communicate directly, and you don't have to come to the office. This is one of the most wonderful things that has happened, that we can communicate all over the world. We don't have to worry about time differences so much, because we can record things. So we have wonderful ways to communicate, and there's no risk in doing it. It may be a good idea at some point to meet face-to-face. It absolutely is, because until you've actually met with someone, I believe you don't really know them. So that is going to ultimately be something that we would like to do. But if you're far away, let's say you're in Senegal, or you are in England, it's not very easy to fly across. But it is quite easy to schedule a conference, and we can discuss what's necessary, and then we can make a plan for the future. The phone number anyone's welcome to call. Then they can call me personally. I always make that myself available. I'm happy to have clients call, or potential clients, or even people that I can just give advice to. I love giving advice. I have to be careful because if I give advice and it has to do with a particularly sensitive subject, I probably can't do that if they're not a client, because it isn't privileged information. If they just tell me about it. This comes particularly in the criminal area because I do quite a bit of that, or my firm does. And we have to be very careful, especially on international issues. But the phone number for the office is 214-630-1221. Again, 214-630-1221.
Could you just share your email address again, please, Ken?
Yes, the email is kwincorn@wincorn.com.
Perfect. And I'll ensure that those contact details are on the website alongside your show notes. So, unfortunately, we have come to the end of the show. But before we go, Ken, is there anything that you feel I may not have asked you that I should have asked you, or any kind of last thoughts that you would like to share today?
Well, one thing that occurs to me is about my firm, that we try to be what I call a one-stop shop, which means that when someone calls, we can cover many, many, many different interrelated areas, whether it's aviation or it's corporate litigation or personal litigation, or, there's just about any area you can think of. If we don't have the expertise in the office, we know someone who does, and we can work with them. In many, many cases, I would prefer not to just refer the case out. If it's something that really needs attention, I would like to remain in it or have one of my attorneys to stay involved, even if it's just to supervise. That way we know that it's being done properly and the person is getting the attention they need. One of the things that I find the most frustrating with lawyers is the unwillingness to communicate. They answering phone calls, answering emails, and doing it in a timely fashion. So that's the reason why I like the idea of staying somewhat involved. We look forward to speaking to everyone, seeing whether we can't be a help.
Thank you so much for that, Ken. So that's all we have time for today, ladies and gentlemen. You have been listening to attorney Kenneth Wincorn. Thank you so much for sharing so generously with us today, Ken. You have certainly demonstrated that you are a true educator and advocate for your client's success. So thank you.
It has been a wonderful experience, a pleasure, and I look forward to the opportunity to meet some of the people who are watching or listening to this program.
You are so welcome. And I'd also like to take a moment to say a big thank you to you. Yes, our listener. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day and for joining us on what can only be described as an insightful and informative conversation with one of the leading attorneys in Richardson, Texas today. Again, his name is Kenneth Wincorn. Make sure you do check him out, because if there's one thing I'm sure after listening to Kenneth today is that you're going to be in good hands and a safe place to get started. So that's it. Once again, my name is Stuart Andrew Alexander. I'm a long-lost distant cousin of the British royal family, but they just don't tell anybody, Kenneth. Can you believe that?
What a shock.
It is terrible, isn't it? Absolutely terrible. It's scandalous.
I'll write them a letter.
Yeah, you do that.
Let them know.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we will be back shortly with some more leading divorce professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Divorce Conversations. So, until then, take care, have a great day, and always remember this: love your children more than you hate each other.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.